But I think the way I got the role was because I was able to demonstrate that actually I can bounce from motor trade to development and the other businesses that I was involved with at the Chartered Accountants.
Gavin, hello, how are you doing?
Hi Ben, yeah, really good, thank you, really good. How are you?
Yeah, it's been an interesting world recruiting in a pandemic, but yeah, not too bad at all. But firstly, thank you again for agreeing to spend a bit of time with us today to do Climbing the Ladder with Gavin Hills. Now, just to remind you and people who may be watching this, the reason we do this is so that we can get some interesting insights, essentially, to understand how people, whether they're FDs, CFOs, to understand their journey, so we can share that with other people and actually help educate them. I always get questions about best routes, doesn't matter what qualification, do I need to qualify, timing. So just by sharing your story, I'm hoping will help other people. And yeah, it's also quite interesting as well, because there's lots of different routes to get in. So now what I'd like to do, if that's all right with you, Gavin, just explain, if you don't mind, just in terms of kind of what your current role is, and as an FD for a company called Carrington West, what that means and what do you actually do in that role?
So I'm the finance director at Carrington West. My role encompasses everything to do with the finance. So I've got sort of autonomy over the finance section. I also look after the compliance team. So as you well know, Carrington West being a recruitment firm, we have to make sure that all of our candidates are fully compliant and right to work and all that sort of stuff. So I look after the compliance team as well. I also manage HR, and I'm also looking after IT as well. Now, what I find with a lot of smaller businesses, so turnover is probably 35 to 40 million, so it's relatively sizable from that side. But what you find in a lot of these businesses, particularly like this, is actually the FD is the one that kind of picks up the bits and pieces that either no one wants or no one necessarily has the skill set. So it's kind of the sort of thing that sort of falls by, if not falls by the wayside, at least falls to my feet, which I'm quite happy with.
And I suppose because with Carrington West, you've been there for, it's about 3 and a bit years. So I guess with these guys, I know your kind of background a little bit, but it's obviously very different perhaps to some of the other roles that you've done. Because I know you've been in recruitment before for quite a large firm, but you've also worked in like FMCG or kind of food manufacturing, some might call it, a real kind of a bit of a mix. And I guess, how would you say your experience, I guess, working from a kind of FMCG kind of environment moving into recruitment, has that helped at all, or is it completely different worlds?
So they are completely different worlds, but there's some underlying principles, not least just the simple accounts are pretty straightforward. What I actually find, it's much more about the relationships you build with people and your team in particular. The actual nuts and bolts of what I do, I think that's relatively standard across the businesses. Recruitment in particular has a very structured way in which the financing and where finances come from. And so once you've got to grips with that, then it's kind of a case of managing that and keeping that moving in the right direction, monitoring cash flow and those sort of things. When you're in, so I have been you're right, in FMCG, that's much more focused on the here and now. So, what's happening at this moment in time, and what can we, is this next product line going to be profitable? Whereas we know, the key is getting contractors out the door and making sure that we've got those. Whereas FMCG is about getting products out the door, and whether or not that each one of those delivers a margin. So it is very different, but underlying it all is the
principles are there.
Principles of standard principles of accounting. They don't change anywhere you go, and there's all the tax and regulatory things that you need to be aware of as well.
And I guess with the way the market is now, and I guess it has been historically as well, I guess in my experience, quite regularly I'll speak to people who want to move from industry. How did you get that break, I guess, from moving from an FMCG into a recruiter kind of sector? Was it a case of something had to give, or how did that happen? Or were you just in a better market? How do you reckon that worked?
So first time around, so when I went from FMCG to recruitment, it was, I think, probably born from my experience in having worked at Spoffors, firm of chartered accountants. I was able to, in the interviews and the discussions I was having, I was able to demonstrate that I had a broad base of knowledge. I wasn't isolated in FMCG. I had a lot of experience from other businesses as well. I kind of moved from classified advertising to FMCG and then to recruitment. So it was about, and it was a deliberate move to try and build the breadth of experience that I had. But I think the way I got the role was because I was able to demonstrate that actually I can bounce from motor trade to development and the other businesses that I was involved with at the Chartered Accountants.
Fine, and you reckon that exposure has really kind of set you up quite well, I guess, in terms of where some might struggle to say they've kind of maybe touched in different areas, where you can kind of relate to something from even if it's a little while back to kind of go back to and refer to and draw into interview and stuff like that by the sounds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I found that very helpful, and then moving from so that was kind of the first job in recruitment. Then I kind of went and did a slightly more diverse role at a very, so it was very diverse. Moving from sort of farming to manufacturing and housing development and all sorts of land management. So I moved from that, and then going back into recruitment was actually relatively easy, and actually came about through a friend of somebody, and sort of put me in touch with the right people. And actually sometimes that goes quite a long way, just having friends in the right places, and a little bit of nepotism, I suppose.
With that then, I suppose from kind of talking about where you're at right now at Carrington West and an FD wearing many hats, what, if you can, what would you say a typical day looks like for Gavin Hills as an FD right now?
It's very much making sure it's plate spinning is what it is. So it's making sure that everybody has what they need to be able to move forward with their roles. So I will spend some time going through emails. That's where a lot of my work comes from. Somebody, Gavin, could you just, what's this situation? Have you got this? So there's a bit of reactive stuff along those lines. But then it's making sure that across the board, everybody in my team knows what they've got to do. And so that's, I meet with everybody on a fortnightly basis, all my direct reports, and spend some time with them, making sure that they know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and whether they need any help from me. And actually, I still get people, just walking up to me and saying, again, would you mind, can you just shed some light on this? And then that's when the opportunities for coaching or training come in at that point, because more often than not, they'll come to me with a question and I'll answer it with a question and get them to answer their own to try and help them move forward. In answer to the question, there is no real typical day. It is very much just dealing with what needs to be done, and then sitting in management meetings and all those sort of things as well.
And I guess more than perhaps many, but like with the recruitment market, it can be sometimes quite reactive. Would you say that's reflected in your role then? So like how your day would look typically now would be very different to, like you say, even though the principles are the same working with manufacturing, it's still a very different sort of working day, week, month sort of thing.
It is, yeah, definitely. With FMCG, although the products are much more fast moving, here it is the process that needs to be fast moving all the time. So just today I've had to deal with some queries on tenders. I've also then had to deal with queries on payroll, and somebody's come to me with a legal question as well. So it is very much trying to make sure that everybody's got the tools and the ability to be able to make those fast, because as you know, minutes can count sometimes when you're making placements. So somebody comes to me and says, can we do this? And they kind of need an answer now, and I'll look to do that.
I suppose kind of scrolling back then, obviously you've got a little bit about you more recent, and in terms of kind of where you're at today, what made you get into finance in the first place, Gavin? Like, why was it something that you're like, do you know what, I've always wanted to become an accountant one day?
So I left A-levels. I left college. I didn't do particularly well necessarily. Certainly some of my peers were a long way ahead of me, and I kind of had enough of learning by that point. So I was like, no, don't want to go to university. So I then went and worked for a construction hire company at FL Gambles, and was in their accounts department, but just as a admin effectively. So just doing a few bits and pieces. I also got involved in a little bit of IT, so I think that's perhaps where that bit started as well. I had an A-level in computing. just kind of fiddled around the edges there. Saw my mates at university, they were having a whale of a time, thought I want to do that. And didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I ended up just doing business studies, something fairly bland. And took a couple of, during my first semester, took a couple of accountancy, cost accounting I think it was, aced it, and I thought, ooh, hang on.
Yeah.
I quite enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And it was that first set of exams at university that actually turned me onto accounting at that point, and I then turned it into an accountancy degree with a sandwich year at a firm of accountants, and that's kind of where it started.
So I guess it's kind of a case where you've almost discovered an interest to a degree, where you, like you say, you're doing something a bit broader, and one of the modules seems to have kind of been a bit more interesting. You've gone, do you know what, actually, I'm enjoying it. And the thing is, it's true, isn't it? Everyone tends to stick with what they're good at and you tend to come hand in hand with enjoyment as well. And you do think it's just a case of them just running with it from there?
That's it, absolutely. It was, I was sort of not quite bumbling along, but I was bouncing along, never the brightest in the class, never the life and soul or anything like that. So it was just finding my niche. Took these couple of accountancy ones and really enjoyed it, and actually happened to be quite good at it as well. So the two just, it just meshed together, and I was like, well, perfect, and then sort of looked into it a bit more and thought, yeah, no, I can do this.
So then you went to uni, and then were you pleased with your result? And did that support you with your next step into finance? Or how important was it, do you think?
Yeah, so what I did, so yes, I was pleased. I got a 2-1, so I was comfortable with that. I actually did it as a sandwich year as well. So my third year, I came back home and worked for a firm of chartered accountants. So I got a real taste for it at that point. And then, so it was, I think that coupled with the 2-1 enabled me to get into Spofford's at the time on their graduate program as a trainee accountant. So I think that combination, as well as perhaps having a little bit of work history, I guess, having worked for a couple of years before I went to uni, I think all of that helped me to get my initial placement at Spoffs.
With that then, when you joined, was it like a trainee sort of, I suppose, with the study, how did that all work? Because I'm assuming, from your record, I saw from your credentials, your ACA and all that sort of stuff. Was it something that it was part and parcel of the traineeship, which it normally is, obviously?
It is, yes. I went on to a full sort of training contract with them, but they paid for everything, and they sent us off. They tend to do it in years. Get your degree sort of July, August time. They start their intake in September. There's probably 5 or 6 of us that joined the firm at the same time. And they then sort of put us through the ACA qualification themselves. So we went off to Reed Business School and tend to do it in sort of blocks of, we'd be off for 2 weeks. It was a residential course over in Oxfordshire. So we did 2 weeks on, come back, work for a bit, and do some sort of home study at the time. Then another couple of weeks, a bit more home study, and then a couple of more weeks, and then take the exam straight after. So it was really well structured, really well organised. And Reed Business School, it's a little while ago, but I know they're still going well. I loved it. I thought it was a really great atmosphere, really conducive. It's in an old manor house. It was really conducive to just concentrating on study.
How did you find actually working and doing further study at the same time? It sounds like you were in a really structured environment, which was kind of well suited to do both. Did you find it would ever get to the point where you're like, this is just a bit much?
Yes, absolutely. It was a huge commitment. Not just the 2 weeks that you spend away. You come in, you do a couple of full days work, sometimes a bit more than a full day's work, and then you come back and then you've got to study on top. And you had to study on top, otherwise, you were going to fall behind. You had to do your mocks, you had to do all these, your question practice. And if you didn't, you were going to fall behind, and you weren't going to pass. And it was really difficult, very, very worthwhile in the end. But it was difficult. It was difficult. Where it all got a bit much. So I only failed one exam, unfortunately, which was right at the end, and I was trying to juggle a new baby, moving house, and everything, and it all fell apart at that point. So that's the only exam I failed at the time, and a bit frustrated, but it
Gavin, let it go.
Wait, everything, yeah.
It's a while back now. It's fine. It's fine. You don't need to worry. We can move on from it. It goes to show, because my leading question, I guess, from there was going to be around the case of, sometimes when we recruit for businesses, Gavin, they want to know how long it's taken to qualify, whether that's ACA, like yourself, or ACCA, SEAM, or whatever. How long did it take you to qualify, and do you think it actually matters?
It took me 2.5 years to do all the exams and 3 years in total to get all the experience and get signed off and all those sort of things. So it was 3 years at SPOFs for me to get my letters. I had a bit of a head start by having sort of 4 years of accountancy degree behind me, but those 3 years were the time it took me really to qualify. And when you say, does it matter? Does it matter whether you qualify, or does it matter how long it takes?
How long it takes?
No, I don't think it does. That comes down to how you study and how you. So I know some very good accountants that took a bit longer than that to qualify, and some that are still going through that process. So I think within a firm of chartered accountants, it's much more. The timescale is much more restricted. They expect you to qualify. You do your first year as a junior, your second year as a senior, and your third year as a manager, or at least moving that way. It's very structured. Whereas if you're in industry, I think that the opportunities sometimes are the opportunity to display your knowledge are perhaps a little bit more limited. So I think that can take a little bit longer. And actually, which one's right? I don't think there's a right answer.
Because what's quite interesting, where you said, I don't mean to bring it up again, your last module, which you had to retake, there's a lot going on in your personal life, which obviously plays a huge part. And that's the case for many people, isn't it? Kids, children, puppies at the moment, all sorts. And yeah, it does take a toll. And it's always quite a tough one, I find, because I think my opinion is, as long as you get there in the end, that does matter. But sometimes people might allude to that being reflective in terms of motivation or attitude, or like can do, that sort of thing. And I guess it does depend on the person, the role. And yeah, a lot of my experiences, a lot of people recruit in their own image. So if it really is important to them, it tends to be really important for that person that they next bring in. So it's quite an interesting subject. Yeah, I think that would be really helpful to thanks for sharing that. I think that's quite an interesting point. With that then, when you come to recruit, do you prioritise?
Depending on the role, I suppose. If I'm looking at role, so if I'm looking for somebody to come in as a financial accountant or financial controller, something, I personally prefer them to be qualified at that stage. That would be my preference. And then with that, it's almost implied that they would have some level of experience. If they've got then relevant experience, even better. I think I would see somebody operating at that level, I would see a qualification as almost a prerequisite on my side. And that's just me personally, but that's what I would like to see. When it comes to the credit control, accounts payable, those sort of roles, experience is everything. If you've got if you happen to have, if it's a payroll role, if you happen to have a payroll qualification or a credit institute, credit management, then brilliant. That's a huge step up. But actually, that's much more about experience and being able to prove that you can do the job.
How important do you think that's been, having an ACA qualification to getting to where you are today?
I wouldn't be where I am without it. No question at all. It's opened enough doors. There are enough roles that or the roles that I have applied for, almost all of them have been, ACA, ACCA, CIMA is a prerequisite. You must have that just to get your CV through the door. And I think what it does is just prove, I guess, that you've got that underlying competence. You haven't got to try to demonstrate it any other way. It just gives you, can you do the job? Yeah, probably. What you like as a person, and it's then building on that, and that's where you try and build the relationships as quickly as you can, I guess, in the interviews to try and sell itself a bit at that point.
It just goes to show actually how important it is with becoming an FD. With that, how important do you think it is to do a formal qualification, even including kind of like AAT? How important do you think that is? I appreciate it, like you say, if it's more ledger roles, it may be slightly different. But do you think how important do you think it is that they start either an AAT or a CIMA or ACCA or ACA?
I think it helps a lot, and I've always encouraged those in my team to study. As I guess, as we referred to at the beginning, it just gives you that underlying knowledge. It gives you that initial step, that initial understanding to be able to almost go across any business. And actually, this is, accounts are accounts. There's a trial balance that is the same. It might look slightly different, but its fundamental principles are the same across all companies. If you've got those qualifications, it just helps people to understand and say, well, actually, yes. So they can do that little bit. They can do that bit of the job. Now what else can they do as well? What experience have they got? That's, for me, I've always encouraged it. Help create a sustainable career. I've been out of work a couple of times, and I remember the first time very clearly. Well, that was a bit of a shock at the time. Within 3 days, I had another role. I had another role because I was a chartered accountant that could just come in and just get on with it. And that's exactly what I did. So I just need somebody to come in and just sort that out. And that's what I did. So it was on a contract basis, and it worked perfectly. And it's because I was, I just had that underlying experience and had the qualification, I believe.
And particularly in this market at the moment, what we're finding is that, unfortunately, QBEs are really having a difficult time. I think the market, where it is so uncertain, a lot of people want perhaps the peace of mind, as you're saying, that you've been there, you've got the piece of paper. I appreciate sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean you're the best at doing the role, but it seems like at the moment it's been quite important for the market. So would you think, with people who are kind of those in finance now, what advice would you give somebody if they want to become an FD?
So I think it's making sure that they've got a bit of breadth of experience. That's what I understood when I was out of practice. I'd just come out of practice. What I decided, I didn't want to be a partner. I made that decision when I was a manager. I'd been there for 7 years, and I thought, I don't want to be a partner. I want to be a finance director. And it was just building up my level of experience for different scenarios that happened, and that's all it really was. It was just understanding and having the experience and the instinct, I suppose, to make those decisions. And that's what I think you need to do, is to try and get a bit of a breadth of experience across a number of different sectors. That helped me to build into an FD role. I was a financial accountant, then a financial controller across a couple of businesses, and it was only I got promoted internally from an FC to an FD on the basis that actually you can take on all these other bits and pieces. You've proved your worth as an FC. You can have that extra bit of responsibility, and it was from that point forward.
With qualifications being quite important for your development.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously, having a spread of sector experience is also has been quite helpful by the sounds of things to getting you to FD, I should say. Finally, just on this part, is there any other attributes you think, or any other things that people should bear in mind in order to get to in your chair one day?
I think building relationships. So relationships with people is hugely important. It becomes, when I was a financial accountant, it was much more about your technical ability. As you progress further, become financial controller, it's then about effectively managing people and effectively building those relationships. And I definitely did not do it all right to start with, but I'm sure I'm still making mistakes now. But it's that process, I think, and being able to manage people and manage expectations a little bit as well, where you need to. But yeah, managing people, I think, is perhaps the bit the softer side that can be a little bit more difficult sometimes. That you get your technical expertise, and that's where your qualifications come in, and then after that, it's then building those relationships.
And we're seeing it as well on our side, like it's all about value add roles, and the word business partnering is just in most job specs these days, and the importance of the softer skills. Because I think sometimes, as you kind of suggested loosely there, that sometimes you can get people who are particularly technical, but maybe articulating that or kind of partnering with people internally can sometimes be a bit more of a struggle, perhaps. So these skills are becoming more important, I guess, at your level more so, but even more so, like kind of commercial management, accounting sort of roles or whatever, these value add sort of positions. Yeah. So it makes complete sense. So, but what we like to finish off with is just 3 silly questions just at the end, just for a bit of fun and a nice way to wrap up. So if you didn't end up in finance, what do you think you'd be doing today?
I think I probably would have gone down some kind of IT or computing route, I reckon. Like I said, when I was first in the workplace, I was helping my manager at the time with his side business of selling PCs. I'd done a computing A-level, so I think I probably would have ended up in that world, I reckon. Probably I would have ended up, I don't know, coding or in support or something like that, maybe networking. I didn't really know enough about it at the time, mind you. Computers hadn't long been invented, so it would have been, I'd have developed with it, I think.
Knowing what you know today, what advice would you give yourself now if you could go back?
Do you know what? I always thought, looking at my managers and the FDs that I was working with, it almost felt mystical. I'd come to them with a question, they'd know the answer, or they'd pretend to know the answer and give me something else, so I ended up going to find the answer. So I think perhaps that it would be something along those lines of trusting your instincts, trust my instincts a little bit more. You know, I felt like, you know, I'd ask the question as opposed to go with the solution, and I think that's perhaps what it would be.
Like trusting kind of your gut to a degree and actually just being more confident.
Yeah, and I think some of that just comes with experience. You know, the more times you go through it, the more things you know what can go wrong. You know, but there is no magic wand. So, you know, trust your instincts, and that would probably be it. That's what I would say is the thing to tell my younger self. That, and perhaps the self-help books aren't quite such a waste of time as I initially thought.
Okay, no, it's all right. And I guess lastly then, classic one. If you could invite 3 people over for dinner, dead or alive, who would they be? And you can't say family.
Yeah, so I think I would have quite like Churchill there. I think.
Yeah.
Some stories in the probably David Attenborough.
Yeah, that would be a good shout.
I mean, that's almost a given, isn't it? That one. Maybe the Queen. Something, you know.
Oh, God, this sounds like I won't say the word I was going to do. This, except from David Attenborough, I think this dinner, what would you be eating? It sounds like a
swan, mostly, I think.
But fine, all right. Well, some interesting choices there, Gavin. I won't hold it against you. But thanks so much for just spending a bit of time. Like I say, it's just a bit of fun, and I think actually sharing your story is interesting, and I think it's an interesting route. And actually, you've worked across quite a few different sectors as well, which does make it insightful. So thank you for making a bit of time for us today, Gavin. And we'll speak again soon.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks very much.